Welcome to the eShopperReviews podcast, episode 12. This is the podcast for March 2022. I'm Jenn-submitted.
And I'm Jake McNeil.
For those new to this podcast, eShopperReviews is a subreddit on reddit.com where Jake reviews games on the Nintendo Switch platform, and you can find this subreddit at the URL reddit.com/r/eShopperReviews. We currently have over 1,800 reviews and counting, and we are supported by your donations on our Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/eShopperReviews. This month's sponsors are Andy Miller, Xlean, Johannes, Reddit user Rambo Fox, Ilya Zarev, Connor Armstrong, Eli Goodman, KH, Christopher Wolf, and Stove. Thank you all for helping to keep the reviews coming. Now on to the Patron-Voted game, Kirby and the Forgotten Land.
I should note, this is the most highly voted game in our poll as of this moment as we're recording. But as always, there's time between now and the end of the month for one of the other games to get voted on. It's just this one is currently the one in the lead. So.
I don't blame them.
Yeah, I'm super looking forward to this one. This is one of my more anticipated games this year. It looks beautiful. I'm kind of wondering how open-ended it is. I certainly don't think it's open world. It doesn't look open world, but just how open-ended the levels are. Because now it's the first fully 3D Kirby platformer, and that's super interesting. I cannot wait to, and everything I see about this game makes me more interested.
Can I just say how freaking adorable the creatures are in the game?
Oh yeah,
the little wolf dog things. Oh my gosh, I want to just snuggle them.
The Kirby games have always had really adorable character design for all their critters.
I can't believe how adorable they are.
Okay.
But I really hope that does stay number one.
Well, if it ends up being something else, then I'll end up reviewing something else. We'll see. But I do hope to get to this game sometime this year if it ends up not being the one that wins the vote.
Okay. So for next month, we have a couple of games that our patrons can vote on. We have Advance Wars 1 and 2 Reboot Camp, Nintendo Switch Sports, Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, and Nuclear Throne.
I wanted to give a bit more variety this month than I did last month. For last month's vote, it was all new games, and this month is kind of a mix. A couple of new games, a couple of old games. You got more indie title in Nuclear Throne. You have, I think, the last major Pokemon game I have not yet reviewed in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee.
Which, let's be honest, is just a rehash of Pokemon Pikachu. Right?
Well, it's sort of. It incorporates elements from the Pokemon Go games.
Mm-hmm.
Advance Wars, I'm a huge fan of the originals. I really enjoyed them, and I'm super looking forward to seeing the remakes. And Nintendo Switch Sports, I got in on the test run just recently, their little advanced test, online test thing. And I had to say, I was kind of iffy on it prior to this. After playing that advanced online test or whatever they call it, I'm looking forward to it a lot more. It really surprised me. So any of these games I would be thrilled to have voted in, but I leave it to our Patreon patrons to decide which of these games I will review at some point in the month of April.
All right, so we'll talk about the highlights that eShopperReviews covered in the month of February 2022.
Yes.
Just to note, these are not necessarily games released in January, but games reviewed in the last month, and we'll start by talking about the best games.
Yes.
And I'm actually going to go backwards on the list.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, backwards we have The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD.
Skyward Sword, I feel like, has a reputation within the Zelda franchise as being the worst 3D Zelda. And to be perfectly honest, I think that's well earned. I think if you compare Skyward Sword to any other 3D Zelda game, it has issues. And those issues pull it back. They keep it from being as good as it could be. But saying it's the worst 3D Zelda game is kind of like picking on a Pixar movie and saying that's the worst Pixar movie, when all the Pixar movies pretty much are good. So it's like the worst of the best kind of thing. You're
Fair
still
enough.
getting a really awesome game. And in the case of Skyward Sword HD, they really put a lot of effort into trying to rework this game to make it the best version of this game that could possibly exist on Nintendo Switch. They gave multiple control options, they made a lot of quality of life features, all the annoying characters who kept bugging you throughout the game, you know, the little Fee sword character in the original version of this game was constantly nagging you, like being even worse than Navi in Ocarina of Time. And in this game, a lot of that stuff is optional. They reworked the motion controls, which I think they did as good as they could have done on Nintendo Switch. The Nintendo Switch isn't really... It doesn't have the same motion control setup as the Wii did, so they could only do so much. But I think given what they could do, I mean, the graphics in this game look absolutely gorgeous, even though we're talking, I think it's like an 11-year-old game. It looks wonderful. They did a great job bringing that up to modern day standards, and it's still a very epic and cinematic experience. It's great by most standards. It's just compared to any other big 3D Zelda game, this kind of comes up short, but it's still a really good game.
Okay, the next one I love the title of.
Mm-hmm.
Long Story, a dating game for the real world.
Long Story really, really surprised me in multiple ways. When it comes to visual novels, oh man, I feel like I'm repeating myself here, but I'm not a big visual novel guy.
But you've played so many of them.
In the course of writing these reviews, I've played tons and tons of visual novels, and they really run the gamut all over the place. Some of them are surprisingly good, some of them are really bad, and we'll talk about some really bad ones in a bit. Long Story starts off automatically being one of the better ones. It's really well written, the characters come across very genuine, very realistic, save for a few characters that are intentionally weird. Like there's one character who is constantly, like they're never seen outside of their mascot costume. They're wearing a turkey mascot costume throughout the entire game, never have a single spoken word, and are constantly pantomiming expressions to your character. It's very bizarre. But outside of a few very bizarre characters like this, it's mostly very grounded. And for the record, when I say visual novel, I'm sure most people get this idea of this Japanese-developed anime-style game, and that's not what Long Story is. Long Story has a very Western look and feel to it. What really surprised me about this one, even beyond it just being a good romance story and just good, well-written characters, is this is a very inclusive game in terms of the types of characters that are represented here and in terms of the types of relationships that are possible. Usually when I write a review of a visual novel or a dating game, I tend to gloss over whether LGBTQ stuff is represented in it, because honestly, I kind of feel like that should be expected in these games. That should kind of be seen almost as a standard. Like, why wouldn't they include those relationship options in the modern day? And it's less that it's really cool to see it in a new game so much as it's disappointing not to see it when a game doesn't have those options. But even with this kind of set as my new standard of expectation, Long Story really surprised me. And I don't want to spoil it for people who want to experience the story for themselves. And they might not even find themselves on a story path that has this. But suffice it to say, I got to one point in the game where a character was talking to me and realized the kind of relationship dynamic that they naturally fit into. And my jaw dropped, because I have never seen this represented in a video game. I was absolutely stunned. And so to see, honestly, it felt revolutionary to me to see this represented in a game, on top of it being a game with a well-written story, great characters. Granted, these are all teenagers, so they're not always making rational decisions, but they're teenagers. That's, realistic more than anything, I suppose.
I think I would say that Long Story is very progressive.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Yeah. In terms of how relationships work and how they function.
Yeah.
From what you've told about me, without spoiling it
Yes.
for people. Yeah. All right. Then the last one we have for best games is Pokemon Legends Arceus. And you and I kind of have varying opinions about it.
Which is funny, because I don't think you've actually played it yet.
No, but I've watched you play it quite a bit.
So I should start by saying, technically, I reviewed this game in January, but it was like the very last thing I did in January, and I didn't want to rush into my talking about it in January, so I'm lumping it in with February's stuff just because. Mm-hmm. This is not the Breath of the Wild of Pokemon games that everyone wanted it to be. It has some issues. And one of those issues that I know that you fixate on is graphically it is not great. It's got problems.
I love art. And oh my god, it was so messy to me. I really wished that they had delayed the release for this to clean up some of the...
It is surprisingly lacking in polish for a Pokemon game. There are all sorts of things you can say about the Pokemon franchise, but one that I think is not true is, I do not think that any of the prior Pokemon games have been lacking for polish. Sometimes they've been lacking for ambition and originality.
Yes, I will say that.
Sometimes it's been disappointingly... like the graphics have been really poor compared to everything else in the industry. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at you, Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Radiant Pearl, or whatever the... so disappointing, so behind the times.
Okay, but like, it's weird because Arceus kind of reversed it. It's not a very polished game, but it's very original and creative for the franchise.
And I know we started this kind of trash talking Arceus, but I feel like that has to be said. You cannot talk about this game without mentioning its flaws, or else it just seems like you're biased. And this game has serious flaws, even beyond the graphical problems, and I list a ton of them in the review. I'm not going to go into them here. But even beyond that, for a game that's not quite an open world, but it has open-ended areas, those open-ended areas feel surprisingly bare. There's not much to do in them, aside from fight Pokemon, catch Pokemon, gather supplies. As opposed to, if you look at a game like... it's unfair to compare it to something like Breath of the Wild or Skyrim, but it invites the comparison to Breath of the Wild through its visual art style, and just even like some of the musical cues within the game seem like they're ripped straight out of Breath of the Wild.
That was something else I wanted to say.
And so it invites those comparisons, and compared to Breath of the Wild, where it's like you might round a corner and find something completely unexpected or new.
Secretive, or
exactly
something that kind of entices you to investigate a bit more.
You never get that kind of experience in Pokemon Legends Arceus.
No.
However, despite the graphical issues, despite how it really leaves tons of room for improvement here, despite all its problems, I think this is the most fun I've had with a mainline Pokemon game in I don't remember how long. Like, actually being able to explore the world and see Pokemon in their natural habitat and, hide in the grass till I get a good moment to catch them, and oh no, they burst out, now I need to go and hide, or, to have Pokemon actually attacking me as a character and trying to decide whether it's better to run or toss out a Pokemon to defend myself. All of this stuff is really invigorating, and if the Pokemon franchise goes back to the way it was after this, I think everyone is going to be universally disappointed, because this lays out so much groundwork to build on, to make for a better, more exciting, more invigorating series. And while I recognize this game definitely has problems, absolutely, it's still an incredibly fun game, and it is super promising. Hopefully, Nintendo and the Pokemon Company and Game Freak look at this as a foundation to build on moving forward.
Okay. Moving on to the worst games.
Yes.
First, or rather last one that you put in the list is Angel's Punishment.
Angel's Punishment is not a horrible game. It is an extremely, extremely mediocre Metroidvania. However, it earns its role in this worst of list because it is an extremely, extremely mediocre Metroidvania that is priced at $25.
Ooh.
Which, for the record, one of the games that's generally pointed to as one of the best Metroidvanias ever made, if not the best, Hollow Knight, is currently priced at $15. So when you're selling a game that is $10 more than one of the best in the genre on the same platform, and yeah, you better come with something good, something worthwhile, something unique and interesting that really brings something to the table. And Angel's Punishment absolutely does not.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Miners Races.
Miners Races starts with a good idea. And that good idea is, let's take Boulder Dash, really, really classic, like old school game. Let's take that and make something kind of competitive and multiplayer with it. Great idea. The problem is, it has that idea and then it does nothing, absolutely nothing with it. It plops you down into this world that's automatically scrolling forward, and it's just whoever survives the longest and gets the most gems wins. And there's nothing more to it. I've pretty much told you everything you need to know about this game. And it's not that the core gameplay is bad. It's archaic. It does nothing to it's the same as Boulder Dash. That's all it is. It's just Boulder Dash with scrolling. Try to survive as long as you can. And while not terrible, I feel like you will play this game for maybe a few minutes and then never have a desire to play it ever again.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Last one is Secrets of Me.
Oh, I hated this game with a burning passion.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the other games I can see some redemption for. So, because I told you about this one. I ranted about this one.
I'm wondering if it's the one I'm thinking of.
So this is the one. It's a visual novel game. I reviewed this as...
Yeah, it's what I'm thinking
I reviewed this as a part of my... Oh, I forgot what I called it. My romance week.
Yeah,
my romance and relationships and all that.
Yeah.
The premise of this visual novel is... there's this girl who the main character is playing as who wants to have plastic surgery to please her fiance.
Okay.
And right off the bat, that's kind of a red flag. Like, ooh, why would you? That's I understand. Okay. This is not to shame anyone who gets...
Yeah, that's different.
Plastic surgery or who wants to make themselves look better through the use of surgery. Okay, if that's something that you feel like is going to improve your life, fine. But this girl is constantly talking about how she's worthless, how she's ugly, how no one could possibly like her, how the only way that her guy could like her is if she gets this surgery. And that's ugly. That's a really nasty sentiment to be presenting in a game. But then on top of that, so immediately after the surgery, it's like every single male character in the game automatically feels entitled to grab her, to fondle her, to bring her close, and just dismisses all of her, oh, I don't want this, as, oh, you're just playing hard to get. And it's like, okay, that's really nasty. And then she's in a cafe or a bar or something, and she's trying to think about how she's going to please her fiance. She just got reconstructive surgery for her fiance, and she's still like, yeah, but I want to please him more than this. What should I do? Enter a private detective who's like, oh, you want to know how to please him? What you should do is you should stalk him. Stalk him, hide, and watch what he does, and use that to gather information on him to please him. And I'm like, what crazy person wrote this game? And so she does this, and of course immediately finds, surprise, surprise, that her fiancé is cheating on her and is actually just using her for her money. And once he finds out that she's used all of her money for plastic surgery and so she's broke, which that's a whole other thing I'm not going to get into. He's like, oh, well, there's no surgery that could fix that face of yours. And since you don't have money, I don't want to be with you. And it's like, it's like they needed to make this character so cartoonishly evil to offset the fact that every other guy in the game is also despicable. And I'm not the sort of person who wants to yuck other people's yums, as they say. I don't want to deride anyone else. If your fantasy is, I want to get plastic surgery to make myself beautiful so guys are falling all over me and even getting kind of a little sexual assaulty with me, you know, I imagine there must be someone out there who has this as a fantasy. I kind of feel like that's worrisome, but you know what? If that's your thing, that's your thing, and I'm not going to step on that. But it's like, I can't imagine that's many people to begin with, and then this game treats its topic matter with a delicacy of, I think I said elsewhere, like a bull in a china shop. It does not seem to recognize how much wrong it is stacking up here. And then, on top of that, poor writing and atrociously bad localization. Ooh. And it's like, the game has decent art, I suppose, but beyond that, like, oh, this game is just ugly on top of ugly on top of ugly. Not in terms of the way it looks, but in terms of everything that's beyond skin deep. Which maybe is fitting for a game about a protagonist who gets plastic surgery. Mm-hmm. But just because it's fitting doesn't make it any less ugly. This game leaves a terrible taste in my mouth. And yeah, no, do not play this game. It is horrible.
Okay. Moving on to the hidden gems. Mm-hmm. Smile Basic 4. Okay,
so one of the things... Oh, you knocking on the table here, huh?
Touched it gently.
We're keeping that in. We're keeping in all the rough spots. Let everyone know this is real.
You just don't want to edit.
I mean, yeah, there's that too. Okay, so I had a whole week of reviewing game builder games, basically, where I reviewed like Game Builder Garage, I reviewed Smile Basic 4, Fuse 4, RPG Maker MV, and for two of those games I did not give a review score, and those were Smile Basic 4 and Fuse 4, and I did not give those a review score because those are actual programming languages. And while I have done some programming in the past, like we're talking decades ago, so I'm really out of touch with what the modern standards for programming are. And given that, like, I'm not versed in the C programming language or JavaScript or Unity or anything like that, I'm not qualified to review a programming language. However, one of the things that sticks out for me about Smile Basic 4 is not necessarily the language itself, which seems adequate if you're looking for something a little bit like BASIC on the Nintendo Switch. It's all of the games that users have created. Out of all of the game builder games that I played, the ones that impressed me the most were on Smile Basic 4. There were some shmups on this game that a user created that I could see this game getting published on its own on the eShop, selling for money, and I wouldn't bat an eyelash. I'd be like, yeah, that's worth money. There was another game, what was it called? It was Speed Rungeon, where you are running through this randomly generated dungeon as fast as you can, and you're just trying to find a way to get from the entrance to the exit of each room as fast as you possibly can. You have enemies you can fight, but you're not focused on fighting the enemies. You're focused on just getting the heck out of there. And that on its own was really creative and well done, but it does these other fun little things, like you can propel yourself forward by shooting in the opposite direction to speed your way through. It has a dedicated screen button, which has nothing to do with the gameplay. It's just fun to be running through and then just go, ah!
Wow.
tons of fun. So, while I cannot speak to the quality of Smile Basic 4 as a programming language, it seems fine, but I'm not the one to tell you whether it's worth your time for programming. I can say that in terms of the games that are available to you on Smile Basic 4, there's like an in-game search engine where you can search for user-created games. There's some really good stuff here. And I would almost go as far as to say it might be worth the $25 to buy this programming language just to play the games that users have created for it.
All right. Next one is Gunvolt Chronicles Luminous Avenger 1x2.
I'm not sure if that's 1X or IX or 9 or whatever.
We're close enough.
Yeah, I think it's probably IX2, but whatever. Honestly, I don't have too much to say about this one other than it is just a really good action platformer. It follows pretty closely to the formula set in the first game. I would say this one is just a little bit more melee focused than the first game was. The first game was already pretty melee focused compared to the Azure Striker Gunvolt series that it's a spin-off of. So because of that, this one has its roots in a kind of design style that's a little bit similar to the Mega Man X games. So if that's something that kind of strikes your fancy, this is a really excellent action platformer that kind of has the spirit of those classic games, but it plays somewhat differently. Still very well worth it if you're into that kind of thing.
Then the last one for Hidden Gems is Butcher.
When I played Butcher, I didn't know what I was going to be in for. I was just like, okay, let's try this, see how it is. And very quickly into this game, I'm like, this is classic Doom if Doom was an action platformer instead of a first-person shooter. It has the same kind of vibe to it. It has the same kind of fast-paced action, but instead of being a first-person shooter, you're running around and shooting enemies on platforms, and it is wonderful. Really great action, tons of fun. Oh geez, it's been a while since I played this to review, to be honest, but I seem to recall it being a fairly short game, but while you're playing it, just loads of fun.
Okay, so other noteworthy reviews.
Mm-hmm.
You've mentioned Game Builder Garage.
Mm-hmm. That was the patron-voted game for the month of January, I believe.
Yeah, and you showed me bits of it, and that was pretty incredible.
So when you see the completed code for, well, I call it code, but it's not code. It's all visual in Game Builder Garage. But when you see it put together, it's really intimidating, seeing all these things linked together. But while you're making it, it's not that bad. If you are new to the concept of programming and don't want to actually learn like a new language in order to program, I'd say that Game Builder Garage is a good intro to that, but it's also limited in some ways that are frustrating. I created my own game within it, like my own actual game, which I was really proud of because
you should plug.
If you look in my review, I have a code for the game in the review. You can download it yourself. Your genuine eShopperReviews custom made game. Let's see, it was
something Dave's.
It was Dodgy Dave in Cannonball Cave.
Yeah, there we go.
And I wanted to make sure, because a lot of the games I've seen built in Game Builder Garage don't have a proper title screen. They don't have a proper end screen. They don't feel like a complete game. They feel like a proof of concept. And I really wanted to create a full actual game in here. And Game Builder Garage does not make that easy because it has a limited amount of space. It has a limited amount of, like, you cannot spawn enemies in that game. Every enemy that you create in that game has to be custom built on their own. Which is frustrating. The only things you can spawn are simple objects. Like if you have a gun that shoots bullets, you can have bullets that spawn. Which is kind of what led to me making, okay, you're dodging a bunch of cannonballs as they appear. But I found myself, I spent maybe, I want to say 6 to 8 hours creating this game. I put a lot of time and effort into it, which I feel like if you're making a complete game in any programming language or in any game design kit, you're going to be pouring a lot of time into it if you're making something good. So even though this is somewhat simple compared to a programming language, my tongue is getting... even though this is simple compared to a programming language, it's still going to be a very involved and time-consuming process to create anything.
8 hours working on your game.
Yeah.
And that was fairly simple.
Yeah. I mean, it's a simple arcadey game, but I wanted it to still be a complete experience, and I think I accomplished that. So, yeah, I think as far as Game Builder games go, Game Builder Garage is a good kind of foot in the door in that world, but it's not an actual programming language. It helps you to start thinking like a programmer, but it is not what you would want to use to actually create real games.
Okay, so the next list of noteworthy reviews that you have, I am having trouble figuring out if these are just user-created games, or...
So, yeah, I've listed here what I feel like are some of the highlights of the user-created games within the various game builders. So I wanted to go over some of these, just because I wanted to shout them out. I feel like they're well worth notice. And in particular, if you're wanting to get a feel for what you can do with some of these programs, I feel like these are the ones to seek out. Mm-hmm. So the first one I have here, the best thing I played, the entire week I was reviewing Game Builder games. In RPG Maker MV Player, which is absolutely free, you don't need to pay a single penny to play this game. So I highly recommend you give it a try because it will cost you nothing. Seek out the game What Now? And the premise of What Now is, it starts out looking like it's an RPG type game, but it's actually more of a visual novel. And it takes place at the end of a quest. All the heroes have confronted the villain. They're going to stop him from using the world-ending whatchamacallit. And then they're going to go back to their kingdom, they're going to go back to their kingdom triumphant and report to the king. Except everything I just told you is not what they seem. The villain isn't what it seems like. The heroes aren't what they seem. The world-ending thingamabob isn't what it seems. The king isn't what it seems. The kingdom isn't what it seems. And so, after they complete their quest, then the heroes are like, okay, so now what? Because everything is not really quite what we'd anticipated. And just the story is well written. It has great humor in it. The characters are wonderful. Like, I was absolutely delighted with this, especially because there are so many games in RPG Maker that the writing is not so great. It's kind of a secondary consideration. And it's funny that people have these ideas in their head of wanting to deliver an epic story. And it's like, okay, RPG Maker is not visually impressive by any stretch. But, okay, putting that aside, if you really wanted to tell an epic story, start by writing proper English. And so many games don't do that. And What Now? Quite the contrary. Isn't really epic in its scope. It's kind of a, hey, we were, having this pretense of being epic, but now that we've, hit the climax, it's kind of all downhill from here. And yet, even with that kind of low outlook, there's just really great writing and characters, and it's hard not to fall in love with this game. So that was my top pick for RPG Maker MV. If you're looking for a more traditional RPG for RPG Maker MV, there's one called Kingdom of Neandria, which is very good. I was really shocked at how much effort was put into this. At every single turn, they had an option to do things the easy way or the hard way. And I felt like every single time the creator of this game chose the hard way to do things. And the kind of dedication and level of quality and the care put into this game really shows. Moving on to Smile Basic 4. Smile Basic 4, like I said, some of the best games that I played, best user-created games, were on Smile Basic. And I'm going to name a few of them. So I've already talked about Speedrungeon. Really, really fun game. There's a lot of really good shmups on Smile Basic 4. Cyburst is really fantastic. This is one where I'm like, if they sold this on the eShop, I would not bat an eyelash. It is that good. It is just an excellent shmup. Giver's P3D, also quite good. Has kind of a Star Foxy look to it, but it is a shmup. It just kind of has a 3D-ish look, but, simple polygons. Soldier Collection is another one where it's kind of 4 different variants on a decent shmup. Let's see. There's Celeste Classic, which I feel like is just begging for a cease and desist letter. It is apparently a port of... I don't remember the platform. It's some small-time platform I'm not very familiar with. But it's kind of a more, 8-bit version of Celeste. Like, they have bonus levels in the main Celeste game.
Okay.
So it's kind of like those levels. And really excellent quality platformer, challenging platformer stuff. Of course it is, because it's basically a port of a really great platformer. It's just, I'm not sure if this is 100% legal, but okay. Rally 500 Para 4 is a great old school, kind of think like Outrun, those classic arcade racing games. And let's see. So Fuse 4, I think Fuse 4 has a lot of potential, but I didn't really see this in many of the games that were made for it. Probably the best game that I played on this was one called Senorita Spaceworm, which is kind of a unique take on the classic game Snake. Except with this one, you don't need to worry so much about running into your own tail. That just acts as a point multiplier. You're just trying to avoid objects within the game's area. And so there's kind of a risk-reward thing there where you could try and get close to that triangle so that you can avoid your tail. That way you can keep your bonus, but if you hit it, you're going to lose a life. And it's very simple, but it's well done. And Game Builder Garage, I feel like Game Builder Garage has a lot of impressive proof of concept sort of things there. Like, there was a Doom Eternal-alike thing that had really great gameplay, but it wasn't a game. It was a proof of concept. If I'm looking at the best actual game that I was able to play within Game Builder Garage, it is Ball, which is a recreation of the Game & Watch LCD game Ball, which, if you're at all familiar with it, it is a super simple, you're just pressing left and right to move a character's arms and make sure that a ball doesn't fall when it gets to that side of your body. Super, super simple, but it is an actual complete game, which is something that I don't really see much of on Game Builder Garage. So those were my picks for the best, game builder games for that week.
All right. Moving on to a bit of news. Nintendo Switch Online expansion packs NES, SNES, and Nintendo 64 app has releases for February 2022. Earthbound Origins, Earthbound, Super Metroid SP Special, and The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask.
By the way, thank you for being smart enough to notice my typo there. For our listeners, I had written 2021 because I'm still stuck in the mindset that we're in 2021. It's the pandemic and the
being stuck at home all the time.
Yeah, so time has no meaning in the current day and age. But anyway, people have been begging for Earthbound Origins, and especially Earthbound, to come to Nintendo Switch Online for as long as Nintendo Switch Online has been doing this. And so it is finally out there. It's finally available. I would still say there's still some big games that they have not yet released on Nintendo Switch Online that they still could. For example, Super Mario RPG really needs a modern release. It is a great RPG, still not on Nintendo Switch Online. But Earthbound is a great kind of quirky RPG. You can see how it inspired games like Undertale. Earthbound Origins is kind of the same thing, but more archaic. I mean, you would expect that as much because it's the predecessor to Earthbound. Super Metroid SP Special is interesting. Nintendo didn't really talk about this when they announced that these games were coming out. They just kind of quietly released it next to the other ones. And that's odd in and of itself. But what's really odd is this is a version of Super Metroid that basically has your character equipped with everything they get in the game, and they are right before the ending sequence, which makes this kind of the perfect refresher kind of game to play before Metroid Dread. So why didn't they release this before Metroid Dread?
I don't know.
The timing on this release is weird, but if you have not yet played Metroid Dread and you're wanting to, and you're wanting a refresher on Super Metroid, by the way, Super Metroid is the third game in the series, Metroid Dread is the fifth game in the mainline series, and you still cannot play the fourth game or the second game on the Nintendo Switch, which is dumb. But in any case, this is a good way to get that refresher, or if you just want to experience the ending or see the best ending in the game. You know, where Samus takes all her clothes off. And no, I'm not even joking about... Well, okay, she leaves her clothes on. She takes her suit off.
Okay.
But I had you thinking there for a
moment.
Like, what? Jen gave me this look. It's like, what?
Anyway, continue.
Also, this month, they released... The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask on the N64 app for those who have the expansion pack. I'm speaking in past tense, but the thing is as I am recording this, I have not played this release of this game. So, because it's not out yet. It's not out as I'm recording it. It will have been out once I release this recording, once this podcast comes out. So... You know, hello from the past. We're talking about the future in past tense. And so, how can I put this? Majora's Mask is a Zelda game that I have not played much of. I've only really played the first hour or two of it, and then I got distracted and on to other things. And it's funny, I know that Majora's Mask is beloved amongst a portion of the Zelda fan base. For a lot of people, it's their favorite Zelda game ever. And my impression of it when I played it was good, but it didn't really hit me over the head with, oh, this is the best thing I've ever played. Especially when it's reusing a lot of the assets and stuff from Ocarina of Time.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, I don't have a problem with that. It just didn't really... It didn't really bowl me over like it did with so many other people. But I don't know. I'm going to try out the Nintendo Switch Online re-release of the game, and maybe I will appreciate it now in a way that I didn't appreciate back when it first came out. We'll see.
All right, so now we get to go on to the discussion topics.
Yes.
I hear that the Wii U and the 3DS eShops are closing.
You hear correctly. Nintendo very recently announced this. They laid out a timeline. As I understand it, they're going to stop taking payments for these eShops sometime around, I want to say May or June of this year. You'll still be able to add money to your account, but you have to go about it in a roundabout way. You have to add it either on the Nintendo Switch or on your Nintendo account, on your linked Nintendo account on Nintendo's website. You won't be able to do it through the 3DS or the Wii U. That's in, I want to say it's like May or June of this year. And then in March of next year, you will no longer be able to make any purchases on the Wii U or 3DS
Honestly,
digital shop.
I am very surprised those shops are still open. So.
Okay, so I think it's not controversial to say the Wii U was a horrible, stinking failure.
Yes. Oh, yes.
But it's also a still relatively recent, horrible, stinking failure. I mean, I think it was earlier this year or late last year, I can't remember, Sony wanted to close their PlayStation 3 and Vita shops, and everybody raised an uproar over that. And the PlayStation 3 and Vita are much older than either the Wii U or 3DS. The Wii U and 3DS are both fairly recent.
Yeah. I really don't know why, because I never felt like the Vita was that great of a platform.
Well, have you played it?
I have played it.
It has a very fervent fan base.
Uh-huh.
It just wasn't a very successful platform.
Yeah, but for the PS3, I can understand people being upset about that closing.
Yeah, especially because none of the more recent PlayStation devices, the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5, are not at all in the slightest backward compatible with the PlayStation 3.
Well, that would probably make sense, yeah.
Yeah. And similarly, the Nintendo Switch is not backwards compatible with the Wii U or the 3DS. And there's a lot of games that will no longer be available as of March of next year. Some games that won't be available unless you go and seek out a really super expensive disc or cartridge, and some games that just will not be available at all. Like on the 3DS, there's a game called Crimson Shroud that was designed by Yasumi Matsuno, the guy who made Final Fantasy Tactics and Final Fantasy XII, made a kind of small RPG-style game on the 3DS called Crimson Shroud that has only ever been on the 3DS. After March of next year, it will be unplayable on any device ever unless you have purchased it before that date.
Okay, so speaking of purchases and, just digital shops closing, there's a bit of, I guess, discussion about digital games versus physical games. And I know you personally would rather have digital games.
Well, there's a lot of fine print that goes under that. So,
I know.
Here's the thing. I love the convenience of digital games.
I do too.
I love not having to pop out one cartridge and pop in another, or pop out one disc and pop in another. I love being able to tell my game system what game to play from across the room without having to get up because maybe I feel like being lazy and staying in bed. Or maybe it's cold and I don't want to get out of the comfort of my blankets and stuff. I really like that. And that's part of why that's why eShopperReviews, I'm kind of focused on digital games. However, just because I have that preference, that personal preference, and that focus, does not mean that I don't care about the physical market. It doesn't mean that I think that there is no place for the physical market. I think the physical market has a very important place, and it's kind of scary to think that there may be a day coming, perhaps sooner than many of us think, where there will no longer be a physical marketplace for games, where you'll no longer be able to go into a GameStop, slap down a bunch of money on the counter, and get handed a physical product to pop into your game system. At best, you'll be able to get a card that has a game code on it or something.
I mean, PC games. Most PC games now, you go to the Steam store.
Yeah,
and buy it.
But there's a difference with PC games, which is the PC in general, and I know there's kind of exceptions to this, but I think broadly speaking, PC is the most backward compatible platform there is.
But here's the thing. A lot of PCs now do not come with a CD reader.
Yeah, but you can okay, number one, you can buy a CD reader.
Yeah, but that's inconvenient.
Number two, I would say the overwhelming majority of games, there is a digital version that you can get. Number three, in most cases, it is unlikely that that version of the game is going to disappear. Although, I mean, there are exceptions to this. When Rockstar put out the Grand Theft Auto definitive version of, Grand Theft Auto 3, Vice City, and San Andreas, they yanked the previous versions of those games off of the store, which outraged people. Number one, because why would they make it so you couldn't play the original versions of those games if you wanted to, just because they made a better game? But number two, because the quote-unquote better game that they were releasing was horrible.
Oh, God.
It was a terrible, terrible remake. And so everyone was like, you're forcing everyone to buy your terrible, terrible remake and telling them that you can't get the original versions of these games. That's a really jerk move. And it's, again, kind of a scary sign of the digital future of games. Another example is Konami had this game that they were working on this sequel in the Silent Hill series. And they kind of did a stealth release for a demo that they called PT, which they didn't even advertise this as a Silent Hill game. They just kind of said, well, this is a demo for a game called PT. And you only found out at the end that it was a demo for an upcoming Silent Hill game. But people played this demo. It was directed by Hideo Kojima. And that in itself was kind of eye-catching because, here you had the creator of the Metal Gear Solid series working on a Silent Hill game. Wow, that's interesting. What'll he come up with? And then people played this demo, and it was amazing. Like, it had this really revolutionary technology where different things would happen depending on where you were looking with the camera, and it had this really spooky kind of atmosphere, even though all you were doing was basically walking in this endless loop of a hallway over and over again. But each time you'd go through the loop, things would be slightly different. Or maybe, the light would be bobbing back and forth now. Or maybe you'd go past this door and suddenly it would shut after something was peeking at you. And, really, really inventive stuff using a limited concept. And for some people, this demo, in and of itself, was the best horror game that they had played in years. Just the demo. And then Konami and Hideo Kojima, it's not clear exactly what happened, but it's clear that they basically came to blows, metaphorically speaking. Konami was doing low blow after low blow when it came to Kojima. They apparently didn't like him for some reason or another. It's not sure what caused this to come about, but they started removing his name from games that he was associated with. They refused to allow him to attend a game award where he was going to be honored because I guess they could do that due to contractual obligations or something. And then, in a really jerk move, not only did they cancel the Silent Hill game that he was working on, which is kind of expected if they weren't working well together, not only did they pull the PT demo from storefronts so you couldn't download it anymore, but in the case of PlayStation owners, if you had downloaded the demo to your PlayStation, they had it worked out so that they could remotely delete that demo from your PlayStation.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah. So the all-digital future is honestly kind of scary. And the Wii U and 3DS shops closing are kind of a part of that scariness. Like, all of the virtual console games that are not available on Nintendo Switch Online, and how, let's say you don't want to pay a yearly fee to own your games. Let's say you just want to buy a game and then own it.
Yep.
You want to buy a copy of Super Mario World or The Legend of Zelda, the original one, on your Nintendo Switch. You can't do that. You can only pay a yearly subscription service. For the Wii U and 3DS, you could buy those games outright and then you just own them. That's not going to be a thing starting March of next year. And there are some games that you can get on the Virtual Console that will cease to be once that elapses. Like, Metroid Prime Trilogy. If you want to buy a physical copy of that game, you're looking to probably pay hundreds of dollars on eBay. Or you can go onto the Wii U shop, the Wii U digital shop, the eShop, whatever they're calling it, and spend $10 to get a digital copy until they remove it a year from now.
Yeah.
But that's just talking about virtual console games. At least those exist in a physical space. There are some digital games where they will not be available at all. Like I said, Crimson Shroud is one that comes to mind, where it's like, it will be available nowhere starting next year. Another thing that came up, I mentioned this in a podcast last year, Super Mario 35. Really great online kind of take on Mario, no longer playable anywhere. There was a time where this truly great arcade-style brawler, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, was not available anywhere. Thankfully, in the time since, Ubisoft has re-released it. And the re-release, great game, highly recommend it. I actually don't think I've actually reviewed it yet, or I don't think I've published the review, or if I have, I've forgotten. But in any case, I highly recommend it, but it's also kind of a warning tale that these digital games are kind of dangerous for people who actually care about game preservation, for people who care about game ownership. Mm-hmm. And there's something that I don't think many people are talking about, which is in terms of game pricing. If you have a physical market, that physical market is subjected to the laws of supply and demand. There's so many copies on sale, and people want them so much or don't want them so much, and the price is based on those two factors. How much is there, and how much do people want it? How much are they willing to pay for it? The fewer items there are, and the more the demand is for it, the higher the price. If there's more copies of the game and less demand, the price is naturally going to go down. That's how market forces generally work. When it comes to digital games, however, that all gets tossed out the window for multiple reasons. Number one, the supply is theoretically infinite. They could sell 1 million copies and it would be as if they sold one copy because they're not making a physical product. Number two, if it is a digital-only game, they control their storefront. And if they feel it is in their interest to maintain an artificially high price for that game, they can sell it at that artificially high price as long as they want to. They don't have to pay attention to how much demand there is for it. Mm-hmm. And Nintendo is already inclined to do this even with their physical games. If you want to buy The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, even though we are talking about a 5-year-old game or 6-year-old game now, you're still going to be looking to pay $60 unless someone has it on a good sale or something. For a game that's over a half a decade old, you're still paying full price for it. And that is when Nintendo doesn't have control over the retail marketplace it's being sold in. If you want to go and buy it at Target or Walmart or Best Buy or whatever, they have some control over what they sell that product for. When you're talking about an all digital game, Nintendo or whoever the company who's making that game is selling it for, they can pick a price point and say, if you don't want to pay that price, too bad. It doesn't matter how many other people want that game or don't want that game. It doesn't matter how long it's been out. If we feel like it's best to put a premium on this game, we will do so. And you can see that in games like, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. There was a brief period of time when they actually raised the price of the Wii U game after the Nintendo Switch game came out until people raised a stink about it. And so it's like all of these factors are filtering in. And as much as I love the convenience of digital games, I'm kind of worried about that all digital future that we're looking down the barrel of. Let's be honest. The next Nintendo Switch might have a cartridge slot. The next PlayStation might have a CD tray or a CD slot. Mm-hmm. The next Xbox might have a CD slot. But the fact that I have to say might for all of those, like we are maybe 1 or 2 generations away from game systems just not having physical media at all. And that's kind of scary, especially seeing how anti-consumer so much of the digital market has become. And I've been talking a lot. Jen, what do you think about this?
I really think that physical games should still exist.
I completely agree.
On the simple premise of, I think physical things mean a lot more than digital ones.
Mean a lot more how?
Like impact.
Like physically holding a thing in your hands?
Yeah,
Okay.
Like a virtual hug is not the same as a real hug,
There is something almost kind of magical about getting that game that you've been waiting for a year maybe, and opening into the plastic and popping open the thing and seeing the disc or whatever sitting there.
In comparison, it's kind of like people who really love the vinyl records and being able to, put them on the player and put the little hook or the needle on and listen to the music versus just, what I use is just Spotify and it's all digital. I don't even own the music. I just paid the subscription. So, yeah, I really think physical games should still stay, especially since not everybody has the luxury of downloading tons and tons of games without busting through their data cap.
Actually, that's another point of this that I'd forgot to bring up, which is some of the games on, especially the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series systems, are massive in terms of file size.
Yes, they are. Games are getting bigger.
I don't remember. I want to say I think one of the most recent Call of Duty games was a couple hundred gigs.
I'm not surprised.
And you're talking about game systems where their built-in storage only has maybe a couple terabytes of storage in it at the most. So what you're saying is basically your game system can only hold maybe 10 games like that Call of Duty game on it at any given time. That's kind of absurd. And for those who are listening here, or those who read my reviews on eShopperReviews, I have literally thousands of Nintendo Switch games. And most of them are in digital format, which means in order to house them on my Switch, I've had to archive them, which means I do not have the actual games on my Switch anymore. I just have a record of them, kind of a receipt that says that I can re-download them whenever I want to. And that's not super great. Like, when I was doing the Nintendo Switch sports thing, I had some people in the chat who were like, hey, play another game while you're talking, since the demo is over. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'll go and play Pure Pool, since I'd mentioned that being a really good pool game. Mm-hmm. And I went to go and play it, and I realized, I've archived it. If I wanted to play this now, I'd have to re-download it, and I don't want to keep the people on the stream waiting, so I guess I'll play something else.
Yeah.
This is happening with me, who, yeah, I own thousands of games on my Nintendo Switch, but given how big games are getting, that can easily happen to anyone. I mean, you look at some of the games, like, I think some of the NBA 2K games on Nintendo Switch are bigger in size than the amount of file storage that is on the Nintendo Switch. You cannot play in fact, I don't think you can play those games at all unless you have a micro SD card on your Switch.
So moving on.
Tired of the topic?
Yeah, and I feel like I don't have much to say personally about the next 3 topics.
Okay.
I feel like that's all you.
So, for the record, number 1, those are recommendations.
Oh, okay.
Number 2, I wanted it to kind of be organic. So it's like, the next topic we're going to talk about is... Well, so much for organic. Thanks, Jen.
I'm sorry!
Way to ruin it. So, what's the next topic, Jen?
Well, it was Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
And you did go through a lot of romance games.
A fair amount of romance, dating, kind of sleazy in some cases, yeah.
Do you feel like the, what was that game? Secret of Me?
Oh, jeez. We're back to that, huh? What about it?
Okay, do you think it would have been less sleazy if the message of the game was actually, positive, focused on good relationships and all that stuff?
I'm not sure I understand the game. Do you think the game would have been less sleazy if it wasn't what the game was?
Yeah, kind of. Would you have given it a better rating if it wasn't so focused on the protagonist is worthless, she needed to get plastic surgery, she needs to appeal to all of these suitors to feel like she has self-worth?
I mean, yeah, I still probably would have given the game a bad grade because it's just poorly written and the terrible localization and all of that. But if I wasn't absolutely disgusted with each and every character in that game, and if I didn't think that the message they were trying to send was horrible, and yeah, I suppose I would have given it a better grade if it hadn't been as crappy a game. I'm not sure what you're driving at.
I'm just saying, I feel like maybe a part of the bad review that you gave it was because of the disgusting feeling you get.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, look, especially if we're talking about a visual novel where the focus is on the story, where there's pretty much nothing to the game other than story. Yeah, what that story is, its content and the message of the story, that's going to have a huge impact on my review score for a game. If we're talking about something like a fighting game, if the story in a fighting game is not so good, well, that's really a minor element to most fighting games. You know, if I think the story in Street Fighter 17 or whatever is terrible, okay, it has a terrible story. I'll just skip that and get to the fighting, which is what the game is actually about. You can't do that with a visual novel. It's not, oh, the story in this visual novel is terrible. I'll skip to the story.
Wait. Okay, that's fair. I don't know. Like,
I mean, okay, so to be fair, with some visual novels, not all, but with some, there is a degree of choice that the player has to choose the path that the story takes. So there's a little more to it than the story. I do not feel like this was a significant element in this game. No. And in many visual novels, it's just you have a few minor choices, like you can choose which guy your character is going to pursue. Mm-hmm. That's about it. And that's kind of it here. It's like you had guys that you could pursue, you know, pick which guy you're going to get the story for. And then on occasion, you would get asked a multiple choice question, and your answer would determine your relationship level with this character, which ultimately was just, are you getting the good ending or the bad ending? And yeah, all of that still comes back to, it's still coming back to the story, which is absolutely terrible here.
Fair enough. I don't have anything else.
You don't have anything else?
No, not really.
So, well, hold on. Since we've revealed the man behind the curtain here, and we've talked about how we've planned out topics here, you don't have any opinions on remasters?
Not really.
Have you not played any remasters?
Okay, I guess my opinion is I think they're kind of a waste of time.
Why?
I don't see the point of it. Like, why would you remaster something that's already been made?
Well, number one, if people haven't played it, it's a way to reintroduce it to modern audiences.
Yeah, but why not just re-release the old thing? Like, port it over?
Because standards have changed. Especially, okay, like, earlier this month, I reviewed Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD. I mentioned it before.
Yeah.
Just looking at the graphics, the resolution of that game was massively improved in this new release. I think if they re-released it as it was before, people would look at it and just say, this is an ugly, ugly game. I feel like people wouldn't even give it a chance.
I suppose, but another part of me is like, but that's part of the history, you know?
I mean, I suppose in terms of game preservation, the argument would be made that, well, if you want the original game, you can just get the original game. And you are never going to get the same experience on a newer platform, especially with something like this where the motion controls are such a huge part of that experience, and the Wii's motion controls are very different from the Nintendo Switch's motion controls.
That's fair.
So if you wanted to get a modern version of the same game, it was never going to be the same thing. So they might as well bring other stuff up to the modern standards.
Personally, I'm not a huge fan of remasters. I feel like it's kind of a waste of my money, but if people want it and they want to spend their money on it, good on them. It's just not for me.
So if there was a game that you thoroughly enjoyed and they said we're re-releasing it with modern updated graphics in the modern day, you wouldn't go for it?
So as an example, I never got, as a loose example, I never got to play through Final Fantasy VII.
Sure.
Which, you know, a lot of Final Fantasy fans rave about it still. Mm-hmm. And I know it's being remade. And I also know it's being remade in a way that I do not care for.
What do you mean by don't care for?
I believe, and this is going off of memory, I believe that they're releasing the remake as an episodic thing.
As I understand it, I think it's in 2 parts. And from what I've seen, there's a reason for that. Well, there's a couple reasons, but one of them being that its scope has ballooned to be massive.
Yeah, so they're also adding a lot more content to it. And some people are saying this sounds like their way of putting in filler.
As I understand it, I've actually not played Final Fantasy VII Remake yet, which is the first of 2 parts. Mm-hmm. But I have heard that, number one, it plays very differently from the original game. It is a very different experience. It is not a remake in the traditional sense. It is kind of more of a reimagining of that original game.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, is fine. You can have a really good reimagining of a game. but that a lot of people have said that they actually appreciate the way that they've expanded the scope and really kind of made something even bigger about this game that was already big before. But I think that Final Fantasy VII Remake is kind of an odd, like, there's not really much else out there like it.
No, there isn't.
Like, as I understand it, the word remake takes on a new meaning when it comes to the story of this game, because it's got some kind of postmodernist elements where it's literally remaking the story in a sense.
But, like, okay.
So they're trying something different with
something like that, okay, I can see myself spending money on. But if a remake is just, oh, we're going to make the graphics look a little bit pretty, maybe make the audio a little bit better, clearer, that's not worth my money. That's not worth my time. And that's, sometimes I see, like, that's what a remaster is.
I'm trying to think what a game that you really like that might fit this mold.
I guess Kingdom Hearts.
Okay. They actually did remake Kingdom Hearts with better, somewhat better graphics,
see,
I suppose.
That's what I'm talking about, is if that's all they're touching up on, it's not worth my time.
Okay. That's you who played the original, though. What about, let's say, someone who's maybe younger than you, hasn't played the original, doesn't have a PlayStation 2?
Then yeah, I guess I can see the reasoning for it. But for somebody who's already played the game,
I think that really depends on how extensive the remake is. Like, getting back to Skyward Sword, and I hate to keep going back to it because it's not like the ultimate example here, but Skyward Sword on the Wii had issues. Like I was talking about earlier, it had this character who was constantly nagging you throughout the entire game, and that is something that they have pretty much removed in the Nintendo Switch version.
Okay.
They've added a lot of quality of life features that just make it a lot easier to play through the game. And I feel like if you're going to make changes to a game, if you're not just going to copy paste it, but we've improved the resolution and stuff, then you're talking about actually bringing something to the table. Like, when they re-released Legend of Zelda Wind Waker on the Wii U, they also made quality of life improvements to that, where it was already a great game, but toward the end of the game, it had a lot of really tedious fetch quest stuff. And as I understand it, they really streamlined that portion of the game. And I kind of feel like if you can return back to a game that had potential to be better, and if you can make it realize that potential, I applaud that, honestly, if that's possible. Of course, the flip side of this is maybe then you get the George Lucas effect of I'm going back to the original Star Wars trilogy that everyone loved and changing things around so that Han Solo shoots second and now everyone hates it because that's kind of a formative part of his character. You know, I feel like there's a happy balance you can find there between fixing what were actually problems in the original release while maintaining that kind of beloved classic feel of things. So, the other topic that you wanted to skip over here, and I'm surprised that you don't have any opinion at all on this. Like, even if it's a negative opinion, I still want to hear it. Like, motion controls in video games. Have you not played many games where there were motion controls?
Not really. I remember when the Wii... I'm not looking at anything in particular. I remember when the Wii first came out, I was kind of excited about it, and so was everybody else. But to me, it just felt very gimmicky.
What games did you play on it?
Wii Tennis.
So you played the Wii Sports?
Yeah, the Wii Sports. What else did I play on it? Gosh. You're asking me to go back into high school. I really don't remember. But I think after that, we didn't really get any more games that had motion control because me and my brother, we were far more interested in shooters because a controller, joystick or whatever, was far more accurate than the motion controls was.
See, that's funny because as I understand it, I've not played the Wii version of these games, but I hear that the Wii version of Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare specifically, and the Wii version of Resident Evil 4, that the motion controls make a massive difference in those games, where it's like you actually feel like you are aiming a real gun.
Interesting.
And like as I understand it, many people still consider the Wii version of Resident Evil 4 in particular to be the definitive version of that game. So I think it's not a matter of, I mean, yes, motion controls absolutely can be gimmicky. I feel like it's just, are they called for in this game? You know, is it something that actually adds to the game, and are they well implemented?
So, the Wii did do it very well.
Not always.
Not always, but I felt like for a motion control, like, especially the first of its kind.
Sure.
I think it did it very well. I don't think the Switch is nearly as good.
Yeah, with the Switch, I wouldn't say it's shoehorned in, but it definitely feels like an afterthought when you compare it to the other functionalities of the platform. They were clearly focused on, we want this to be a hybrid system where you can bring it around as a portable, you can pop it into the dock and play it on your TV. That's number one. Number two, we want it to have detachable controllers so that you can seamlessly go from one experience to the other if you want. Number three, we want those controllers to be functional as a pair or to be functional separately so that theoretically every Nintendo Switch comes with two controllers. And hey, let's also work in some motion control and touchscreen features so that theoretically if we want to port over some DS, 3DS, or Wii games, we have that option there. But it's like the right Joy-Con controller has an infrared camera on the bottom of it. I'm not sure if you've noticed, there's a little kind of blackish looking patch on the bottom of that controller where it has an infrared camera. And I could probably count on one hand the number of games on the Nintendo Switch that actually use that infrared camera. I know the Nintendo Labo games use it, but they use it for weird, wonky stuff, like they have it detecting things on reflective tape. Ring Fit Adventure uses it. You hold your thumb over it, and it actually detects your heartbeat using the camera.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
It's interesting. I'm not sure how accurate it is, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
Let's see. There are a few games that use it like as a gimmicky, like this is a night vision camera kind of thing. Like kind of a couple, I don't even want to say indie games, kind of almost throwaway little applications. And beyond that, I'm like, I can't think of anything else that uses that infrared camera. It was clearly put there as a, well, if we want this to be a bit more like the Wii remote, we have that option later. But it doesn't work with any kind of sensor bar like the Wii did.
Yeah.
And because of that, games that want to imitate that style of motion control end up kind of doing a half measure. Like every now and then you have to press a button to recalibrate the motion controls. And for some games that works, for some games not so much. Like there's a kind of puzzle game called World of Goo where you're building bridges and structures. And that's all, you can use a motion control for that. It actually works really well. And every now and then the cursor kind of gets off from where you're pointing it at, so you just press a button to recenter it. Works really well. Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, it's okay, but it has issues. Oddly, when I played the online test for Nintendo Switch Sports, I felt like for the most part that worked really well. And I suppose if we end this podcast soon enough, you might get to try that yourself.
Maybe.
Because one of those tests is tonight.
Yeah, maybe we should wrap it up because I really do want to try it.
Okay, it sounds like you don't really have much else to say on this topic.
I don't.
All right, so why don't you go ahead and close us out here then, Jen?
I actually didn't think of a question to ask you yet. Let me think. Give me a minute. Or two.
Jen is thinking, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see what question she comes up with.
Stop pressuring me!
Come on, I even set you up for a few. Like, we were talking about romance in video games, and you could be like, what's your favorite romance story in a video game? Of course, now you can't say that because I said it.
Ah. Who's your favorite couple in a video game?
That's kind of a...
No, it's not. No, it's not.
What do you mean by couple?
Like how everybody... Oh, and even like fictional couples that haven't even been shipped. Or like aren't canon. Like... Cloud and Tifa are together.
What do you mean by couple?
Like Cloud and Tifa.
Don't give me an example. Define it for me.
Two people who are together in a romantic relationship.
Okay, that's what I was looking for, because I'm like...
Or people that you want to be together because you ship them.
Okay,
headcanon.
Because before you said the word romantic, I'm like, I really like the dynamic between Joel and Ellie in The Last of Us, but that is not a romantic dynamic. That is kind of a surrogate father, surrogate daughter dynamic.
Yeah. No, I'm talking about romantic.
Okay. Oh, jeez.
Are you stumped?
Well, I'm going through the entire history of video games in my head, and it's like, I'm having trouble thinking of any romantic couple that I really feel strongly about. Like, obviously, Mario and Peach have a long history together, but it's like, I don't really feel chemistry between them.
No, I don't either.
And, a lot of people are going to think about Cloud and Aerith or Cloud and Tifa, but to be perfectly honest, I always thought Cloud was a jerk, and I never really cheered for any of his relationships.
I think Cloud just had too much going on with just himself to really...
And I'm thinking back to, like, the Final Fantasy games, and then there was Squall and Rinoa, and that was a nice romantic relationship, but he was also kind of a jerk.
What was that one? Titus and
Yuna. That's interesting, but... I mean, I guess it was a romantic relationship, but it was also kind of an unfulfilled romantic relationship. But that can still count.
That can still count for the question.
Like, there have been a few games where I was just really cheering for the couple or whatever to work out their issues by the end. Like, in Long Story, which I mentioned earlier, the main character I was playing and the character that they were interested in, I was really pulling for them to work out their issues by the end. But I'm not sure if I'd say they were like this great legendary romantic couple or anything. It was like going through my head, like, okay, Link and Zelda, depending on which game you're going in, there's maybe some romantic tension there, but it's not really about that. It's about the adventure, between point A and point B, rather than the meeting up and all. Like, thinking about actual romances in games, I strain to think of any that really stick out in my mind as this is an epic love story, or this is an epic romance, or I love how these two characters are together. And maybe it's just my memory failing me.
I'm actually having a little bit of trouble myself with it. If you were to ask me this question, but based on books, I'd have an answer for you right away.
And then the other thing is when you're talking about favorite, what do you mean by favorite? Because, like, for example, I
guess the one that just...
In Silent Hill 2, the main character, James, and I think his main love interest is, I want to say her name is Laura, have a fascinating relationship, and it is an incredibly good story. But it's an incredibly good story and a fascinating relationship because it is an incredibly messed up relationship. Which I'm not going to get into here because that's kind of a game spoiler, and even though we're talking about a game that's like, a couple decades old at this point, it is one of the best horror games ever made.
Are we just going to say that you don't have an answer?
No, I'm not going to admit defeat. I'm going to keep thinking of stuff here until
I want to try this demo. Come on.
All right, then maybe I should just pick something.
Come on, Jake.
I'm working on it. Ask me again next podcast.
Fine.
I've come up with a bunch of good examples for different types of relationships, but not really quite what we're talking about here. Like, if anyone ever tries to pair Joel and Ellie, that's just ew. That's gross. That's disgusting. Like I said, that's a father figure, daughter figure kind of relationship. That is not a romantic relationship. Or, like I said, James and Lisa, that is not a good, healthy relationship. Yeah, like I said, ask me again next month.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so go ahead and Do your thing.
All right. So, that wraps things up for this month's eShopper Reviews podcast. Again, we want to thank all of our patrons on Patreon for contributing. Patreon donors are the first ones to gain access to these podcasts, and if you're interested in becoming a donor, please check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/eShopperReviews. And once again, if you're curious to read any of the reviews or content mentioned in this podcast, you can find it on the eShopperReviews subreddit at reddit.com/r/eShopperReviews. Once again, this has been Jen
and Jake McNeil.
We'll see you next month. In the meantime, we both hope you found this content helpful and enjoyed some good games. Catch you all next time.
Later!